Let me give it a little. What is up, guys? This is Rio, and today I am sitting behind the wheel of a BMW X5M. That's right, the very first M car I've reviewed on this channel, and I'm super excited to be behind the wheel of this X5. This happens to actually be a 2018 X5M, so the previous generation, the F85 series X5M. I think what's interesting with the X5M is that the X5M was the original BMW M SUV. With the X5, when it first came out in the late 90s, it was the X5, the E53 series X5. They did not make an M version of that car. They did make a 4.8 IS version of that car, but with the E70, with the second generation X5, they eventually did come out with the real X5M in 2010. That was the E70 series, obviously, as I just said. And then in 2015, they came out with this series, the F85 X5M, which I'm sitting in now. This is the last year they made it, 2018. And then since 2020, they've been making the F95 series X5M. That's based on the G05 series X5. So I have reviewed the G05 series X5. I will link that up above, but I have not reviewed the brand new X5M yet, or even the M50i yet. I look forward to review both of those eventually. Even the X5 M50i makes 523 horsepower, which is not too far off of this car, but there are some things that make this a real M car, and we're gonna get into those as we drive it. Before we drive it, I want to mention a couple of the basic stats. So this motor is the S63 motor, which is a variant of the first generation X5M motor, and now the new 2020 X5M also has a variant of this motor. So they all actually share a similar motor. It's a 4.4 liter V8. In this car, it produces 567 horsepower and 553 pound-feet of torque. Propels this car to 60 in the high threes, depending on if you get a good launch, but it is an all-wheel drive vehicle, so it launches off the line pretty fast. Definitely compared to, let's say, the M3 and M4, the F80 series M3 and M4, and older M cars or M3s. In fact, when the X5 and X6M first came out just over a decade ago, they were the fastest production SUVs you could buy at the time. They still happen to be not too far off that mark, although nowadays there are SUVs, like super SUVs, like the Lamborghini Urus, and Cayenne Turbo S, e-hybrids and whatnot to compete with. But the new X5M and X6M competition are still rocket ships. This car also weighs roughly 5,300 pounds, so it's definitely not a very light car, although most luxury SUVs happen to not be light. It's not very far off of its competition, such as the Mercedes-Benz GLE 63S or the Porsche Cayenne Turbo or Turbo S. Those are the main cars it competes with. Regarding price, this car started life in 2018 at just over $100,000. This particular car has a $6,100 executive package, which gives you a heated steering wheel, soft closed doors, rear window shades, aka pleasant blockers. You have front ventilated seats, heated rear seats, full adaptive LED headlights, which look cool and perform very well. You get active blind spot detection, active driving assistant, surround view cameras, parking assistant, head-up display, wireless charging, Wi-Fi hotspot. You get a bunch of stuff, lane departure warning. So that makes this car kind of pretty well-rounded, just a $6,100 package. It also happens to have a nearly $4,000 black Sapphire Edition package, which gives you individual black trim inside and out of the car, particularly along the dash and doors. You get this new black gloss trim. I'm not actually a huge fan of it personally. I think it's just a fingerprint magnet and a scratch magnet. And lastly, with that package, you get these beautiful 21-inch black wheels, and they're very thick. They're 285 rubber up front, 325 rubber in the rear. We'll get more on how that affects the driving, but I think it looks super cool, especially from the rear three-quarter. You have a super chunky rear tire. And the very last thing before we get this beast out on the road, take it for a drive, is the obligatory tall boy test. So without further ado, here it is. All right, so setting off in the X5M, I'm currently in efficient comfort, basically the way these cars all start when you turn them on. With M cars, you have this thing called M1 and M2 on the steering wheel. They're basically preset hotkeys You can customize what modes they change in the car. The way the owner has it set up in this car, when you go into M1, you go into manual, you go into the second tier of the transmission, because the transmission has 1, 2, 3 levels. 3 being the most intense, fastest, brutal shifts, 1 being the most soft, daily drivable shifts. And so yeah, this M1 in this car puts everything into sport. It puts the transmission into manual, it puts the engine into sport, the suspension into sport, and the steering into sport, which makes the steering a bit heavier. Then putting it into M2 puts the transmission into the full 3rd highest max setting and puts every mode into Sport Plus. So when this car is in Sport Plus, it sure as hell can rip. Oh my God, and the exhaust lets out these crazy farts, these blats on upshift, which are definitely far less artificial sounding than those in cars like my own car, which is a 340 with the MPPSK, so a much more artificial burble tune on that car. This car doesn't really burble, it just gives off some nice gurgles and pops on upshift. Also, the way they have it configured in this car currently, when you put it into M2, you get a full tack on the on your head-up display. So yeah, this car definitely gives you a lot of emotion when you're in full M2 mode. Jesus, man. Yeah, so this car, it sounds fantastic. It does have a ZF 8-speed, so not the same dual clutch DCT 7-speed that was found in a lot of the M cars of this generation, the F80s, the F10 M5s, all those cars. It does have, again, the ZF, which is now what you do find in the brand new G80 series M cars and the new X3 and X4Ms, and actually the new X5 and X6, of course, still have the same ZF. So in that regard, it's pretty future-proof in a way that some of the older M cars are not. And I think what that really does, especially in conjunction with the all-wheel drive system, is give you a bit more of a daily drivable M car than you get, again, in many of the cars of this generation. The M5, I would give it a 50-50, but the problem with cars like the F80s, and it's not that they're not daily drivable, it's that they weren't as usable in a daily driving setting, I think, even compared to 340is. You have a lot of people leaving F80 M3s, moving into BMW M340is and saying, wow, this is so much more usable, even if the power is down, even if some of the theater is down. And I'm conflicted because personally, I like theater. I like a little bit of a sense of occasion out of a car, and this definitely gives you a bit more theater than the brand new F97 X3M and X4M and the competitions do. So this car, by being all-wheel drive, despite having 567 horsepower and over 550 pound-feet of torque, it's still very drivable. The brand new F95 series, X5M, X5 competition variants, they produce around 600 horsepower in the regular non-competition variant, and then 617 horsepower in the competition variant, but they produce the exact same 553 pound-feet of torque. Again, the motor is a variant of this motor, so it's not too dissimilar to this motor. Some of the big differences with that car is the chassis is even more refined and even more well-suited for the power than maybe this car, but I kind of have a hard time imagining it being leaps and bounds above this car. I think the car a lot of people gravitate towards over this car was the X3M. Now, as I mentioned, the X3M certainly has a bit less theater than this car, but it happens to be a bit faster. It happens to be a bit more tossable and usable, having a bit more of a hot hatch feel than this car. And it actually sounds a bit better stock. Now, of course, this is a twin-turbo V8, and with a good exhaust system, these can sound splendid. But stock for stock, the X3M competition actually maybe has this car beat on sound. This car, when you really rev it out to about 6,500, 7,000 and give it a nice shift, it does let out a ridiculous blat, and it does have a little bit more roar, but it's still muted in a way that some of these newer cars through programming and coding have, you know, a slightly nicer exhaust note. Now, something that I mentioned earlier is that I love how wide the tires are. 285s up front, 325s out rear, just really wide wheels on this car. And for the purpose of aesthetics, that is incredible. And again, the rear just looks so chunky with that tire and with the, already the proportions of this particular body style. But one of the downsides of having that thick of a tire, especially up front, is it does aid a little bit in a sense of understeer a little bit. BMWs tend to not understeer too much. I mean, they're usually relatively balanced cars, the ultimate driving machine, of course. But what I sense is that sometimes the front tires kind of tramline a little bit, or like they pull into the road more than I'm expecting. Either way, if there's any undulations in the road, that's just a consequence of having a very meaty tire up front. Relatively speaking, or at least driving wise, this car has not really surprised me much. I was expecting 567 horsepower out of a BMW Twin-Turbo V8 and all-wheel drive system to really be a very quick car with a ton of propulsion. The thing that I'm kind of surprised by, pleasantly surprised by, is the interior quality. Now, tech-wise, this is definitely a significant step behind the brand new F95 X5M that has all the latest and greatest BMW tech. This does happen to have iDrive 6, which includes touchscreen, and I think it actually works decently well, but still compared to the brand new system and the Hey BMW and all that in iDrive 7, you really can't quite compare. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by how much leather there is. I just stepped out of a 2014 Range Rover, which I will link up above. This is, of course, a newer car. This still costs quite a bit more now than that car does now, but relatively speaking, a 2018 Range Rover and a 2018 X5M both cost right around $110, $115. In fact, I forgot to mention this car costs exactly $115. And I'm kind of surprised that this car actually has a bit higher quality and more leather than that car did. You have leather all across the upper door, upper dash, but even the lower dash, even the mid door, even the bottom of the door where the cubbies are, where the cup holders are in the pockets, you have leather still. So you have leather all over. I can't even feel a hard plastic anywhere. So when you think about that and you realize, oh my God, for the money, yeah, sure, you're getting a 560 some horsepower twin-turbo V8 rocket ship of a car, but you're also getting all of this leather. You're getting this is an option, but it has a $3,700 speaker system that sounds fantastic. So, and even build quality wise, the grills are all metal. So you begin to realize, actually, this car gives you quite a bit of bang for buck. The seats look really cool. I'm not usually a fan of red leather, but I don't mind it in these little accents that this car gives it to you in, especially with the very muted and subdued black exterior. That's one of the downsides of this car. Even when you compare it to a Range Rover, for instance, that has a lot of prestige when you see it. This kind of looks like a regular X5. This is less so the case with the brand new X5M. It kind of, that new X5M kind of has a little bit more of a presence. This just kind of looks like an M Sport X5, but playing, devil's advocate, what you get is then a very, very, very low-key car that, a sleeper. When you want to push it, this will blow the doors off of most cars out there. At the same time, it just looks so subdued, especially in black. The red gives it a little punch. These seats look very cool, but yeah, all the leather surprised me for sure. Sometimes the fact that it shifts a little bit rough can be frustrating, but I also think it adds again to that, to that character, right? It kind of shakes you a bit, but I like that. And I like feeling like I'm in something special. So one thing that had a lot of people torn on M cars up until very recently was the shifter itself. So this is one of those little funky shifters with no park button, no park mode. You push it up to the side to go up to reverse. In the middle, it's in neutral. You can shift, and you can push it to the side to go into drive, into automatic mode. So putting it into park is a little finicky. You have to leave it in drive, pull the parking brake, and then shut the engine off, and it'll go into park. All the new M cars have addressed this by adding a park button, I believe, or at least the majority of new M cars actually have a park button now, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm torn because on one hand, that's so much more practical, and the fact that it finally has an actual park button is delightful. At the same time, this kind of again added to that character of the car, the fact that not just anybody knew how to throw it into park, made you feel a little bit special. On top of that, despite not being a dual clutch, this car does not have creep mode, which I found interesting. I'm not sure if the new X5Ms and X3Ms have creep mode. I, again, kind of like that it doesn't. Most people dislike that it doesn't. What that means, not having creep mode means that when you put this car into drive, if you're at a complete standstill and take your foot off the brake, most of the time it won't move at all until you touch the gas, like a manual car, as if the clutch hasn't engaged yet. And yeah, it's definitely a bit interesting of an experience. Again, for me, it makes me feel special. It makes me feel like I'm in something unique or something that is not just your regular average X5. God, this thing really hauls. Yeah, personally, I don't mind it having no creep mode, but again, it just kind of adds to this BMW M car feeling you get in this. I think overall, this is a beast of a car. I understand somebody wanting to go X3M, X4M competition over this because this used and those new are roughly the same money. And buying a new car can be nice for a multitude of reasons, especially with the number one reason being newer tech and actually better performance or more usable performance. But I do think you miss a little bit of that raw character, real M character in some of the newer M cars as they begin to be muted by things like petrol particulate filters and more emissions as they become more electrified. And this still has that raw V8, which I know the new X5M as well does, but they cost a bit more than this. You're looking at anywhere from about 110 for a base X5M all the way up to around 135,000 easily for a competition. So the fact that you get all of that in this car for 75, 80 grand for a 2018, if not less for an even older car, it's not a bad value proposition. They're not terribly unreliable. And more than anything, they're just fun to drive. I really enjoy ripping this car around. All the leather inside was a pleasant surprise. The fantastic speaker system. All right, we're in full Sport Plus, Sport Plus, Sport Plus. I'm gonna rip it for you guys one last time before we wrap up so you guys can see just how fast this thing is. Yeah, I mean, it ain't no slouch. But yeah, I mean, with that said, and with how it drives and with how it feels, this car has that Rambo vibe. This is no softie. It's a brute. It has a lot of character, a lot of flavor, and it's unfortunately something that is beginning to dwindle away in some of the M cars, despite maybe superior performance. And with all that said, guys, I really appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure to tune back in for more. Like, comment, subscribe. As always, this is your boy Rio. Peace.